Let's start off talking about attitudes in the United States towards expansionism, that is, expanding the territory of the U.S. Let's take a look at what that was like before the Mexican-American War started. So before the war, you have two Democratic parties in the United States, and they have different views on whether the U.S. should expand or not. You have the Democratic Party and the Whig Party. We'll take a look first at the Democratic Party and their views on expansionism. So with the Democrats, they felt that expansionism would lead ultimately to economic freedom in the country. It's their perspective on what the country should be. They believe the country should be a country of small farmers, where you have a number of different small farmers, and we have enough land for them to expand on and to use for agriculture, and their agricultural produce would basically would lead to the development of the economy in the United States. So that's the Democratic perspective on what the United States should be. It should be a country of small farmers, everyone with their own land, everyone producing their own agricultural output, marketing those agricultural goods to the world, selling them to the world, and that would help to develop the economy of the United States. All right, so that's the Democratic view. Now, in that view, you have to expand. You have to gain more territory because the numbers in the United States are increasing dramatically, right? More and more immigrants are coming. What are we going to do? We don't have enough land for these people to have their own small farms, right? And so it comes down to the idea of what is freedom in the U.S. So to the Democrats, liberty means having economic freedom, and you won't have economic freedom unless you own your own land and are able to produce for yourself, and you're not working for somebody else. Okay, and so the idea is to expand, gain more land, so that the increasing population of the U.S. can expand westward, occupy that land, start small farms, and everyone would have a degree of freedom, right? And that's how the economy of the United States would grow, would be through the production of these farms. All right. So the Democratic view of what the United States should be is really more of an egalitarian perspective, right? Like that everything should be somewhat equal. It's not completely egalitarian, right? The Democrats still had a hierarchy in mind, that there would still be, elite members of society, and there would be middle class members of society, and there would be poor members of society, right? There's still a hierarchy there, but there would be more in the middle class with this perspective because there's more land available, so more people would own land and have more economic freedom, right? That's their perspective of freedom in the United States, okay? Also, in some ways, this expansionist attitude is motivated as a reaction to economic growth in the northern states of the United States. Okay, what do I mean? Well, in the northern United States, we have the Industrial Revolution taking place. You're seeing the establishment of the first factories, mass production of goods, and in these northern states, you have factory owners and businessmen and bankers who are getting very, very wealthy during the 1800s, right? During the first half of the 1800s. Now, this is a problem for some Americans, particularly in the Democratic Party. They're worried that with this expansion of factories and industrialization, that means more individuals will be working as wage laborers for somebody else in somebody's factory or somebody's business. Okay, and that's not freedom to the Democrats, right? Freedom would be to own your own land, to not have a boss, to not be working 14 hours a day in some factory. And so this huge expansion and growth in the United States during the first half of the 1800s is really worrisome to some individuals, particularly in the Democratic Party, right? So they feel that expansion of territory is the answer to this growth in industrialization, right? So more people in America can be free and not just be under the control of bosses in factories. Okay? All right. So that's the perspective of the Democratic Party. Then you have the Whig Party. The Whig Party has the opposite perspective. The Whig Party is mostly made up of wealthy individuals, the elite members of society from the Northeast. Okay, that's who they really represent. And they're worried about maintaining their political power and economic power in the United States. The Whigs promote the idea of internal improvements. That would be the way to better improve economic growth in the United States. So rather than expanding territory and increasing agricultural output, they would rather build canal systems and build road systems and railway systems so that the United States could be more connected, the markets of the U.S. could be more connected, and these businesses in the Northeast could make more money because they could ship their product and interact with more markets in the U.S. Okay. And so basically, these wealthy members of society in the Northeast are looking out for their own interests, right? And they are pretty much represented by the Whig Party. Another perspective of the Whig Party is that the U.S. should lead by example. So the United States basically sees itself as this beacon of freedom in the world, because at this time, for the most part, you have monarchy as the main governmental model in the world at this time, right? There's not a lot of republics, and there's not a lot of democracies, right? So the U.S. sees itself as this beacon of freedom. And so the Whig Party makes the argument that if the U.S. is this beacon of freedom, how is it going to look if we go to war with Mexico and conquer Mexico and take their lands? That doesn't sound like freedom. That sounds like oppression, right? And so the Whig Party uses that argument against the idea of expansion. The Whig Party also is really worried about losing its political power and influence in the United States Congress. If the United States was to expand to the West more and gain new territory, it's more than likely that these new states in the West would be agricultural economies, right? Their economies would be based in agriculture. That means that their interests would be different from those of the Whig Party, right? They wouldn't worry so much about the expansion of big business in the Northeast. And so that would eventually lead towards opposition in the United States Congress, and the Whig Party doesn't want to face that kind of opposition. The Whig Party is also against the expansion of slavery, right? They don't want to see more and more slave states in the West. Why? Well, yes, of course, that also goes against the idea of the United States being a beacon of freedom, but also because if you have more slave states, that means the interest of the slave states will be more powerfully represented in the United States Congress, and again, the Whigs would lose political power and influence. All right. So basically, before the Mexican-American War, the United States has a difference of opinion on territorial expansion.